Hey everybody, it's Murgle, and today we're going to go over the best and worst video. Now, this one is about good old Wrath of the Lich King. Many people consider it the peak of World of Warcraft, which in sheer number of subs, this would be semi-true. The most subs in the entire game was actually a small influx when Cataclysm came out, but they didn't manage to keep any of them. It went down very quickly, but with Wrath of the Lich King, we saw a stable 11 million or so players throughout the expansion. Absolutely insane if you imagine that. And trust me, it was noticeable. People were abundant all over the world, and I really did enjoy that. I was honestly surprised, though, to see the opinions people had about Wrath of the Lich King, especially posts that originated from that time when the expansion was live, because nowadays you see people praising Wrath of the Lich King all over. It wasn't so much like that when I was reading posts from that time. Anyways, let's just get into it, and I hope you enjoy. The Lich King, leader of the Scourge, the fallen prince, Arthas Menethil. Can go by a lot of names now, but you know when you turn on that cinematic and you hear the name, you'll still get a chill down your spine. Arthas was the protagonist of WoW. The game had a thriving player base, as is, but of course, many people had played other Blizzard games before even attempting to play World of Warcraft. This, of course, included the Warcraft saga, and much of Warcraft 3 included the history of the Great Fallen Prince, one of the most beloved characters in the Warcraft universe. You follow his account of what happens, how he becomes the Lich King, and just all of that. So many people were eager to get a chance to take down the king who had defiled his kingdom, pretty much. And of all the expansions, people seem to enjoy the fact that from the beginning to the end, it was very clear who your enemy was. You knew what you had to do, you knew who you were after, who to defeat. It's even directly in the title of the expansion. It says Wrath of the Lich King. And throughout, in all of the areas, all corners, he never lets you forget his presence, showing up as you defeat his champions, his advisors, his subjects, all over. Yet in all his strength and all his malice, he doesn't kill you at any of these points. No, he lets you ascend his kingdom. He wanted you to defeat them. And at the end, he wanted you to be the champion. You were his goal. Giving you all those challenges, he could test your power, and the fact that you were nearly capable of defeating the Lich King himself, it makes you the perfect candidates. So he kills you right when he gets the chance, and you're going to be raised as leaders of the Scourge. That was his plan all along. So yes, the Lich King was an awesome candidate to make a villain. He had a strong foundation already in terms of lore and everything. It all fit together very well. And the forums praised him very much. It was one of the things that I could see people loved was the Lich King. So not all of them, but the majority definitely did love the story. So without a doubt, I would say one of the best things about Wrath of the Lich King was the lore. Now, the expansion was the expansion for casuals, and this could be viewed as a bad thing, as I'll go into that later. However, it really was indeed good for casual gameplay. Despite coming out at the end of Burning Crusade, achievement hunting really became prominent during this time. It was a great way to pass the hours, and possibly to do fun activities that you might not normally partake in. On top of that, in the casual scene, Blizzard managed to tell an amazing story everyone could really get into. So when it came to questing and immersion into the world, it was really an excellent way for everyone to have fun. I bet if I told you to recall a quest line from the expansion, then Wrathgate probably comes to mind, because it just had a great cinematic ending to it, everything. Even in the raiding scene, though, you could see that they were trying to help casual players as well as keeping the hardcore players still around. There were normal and heroic raiding difficulties. In Ulduar, you had hard modes introduced, which is basically the difference between a mythic and a heroic fight. So you do the mythic version of the boss or the heroic. and there's obviously different mechanics, but just overall, it was a way to appease most players. So Blizzard was decent at balancing the best of both worlds, and it's no wonder this expansion had a huge, stable player base the entire time. And the last awesome thing that I'm going to cover, and it's not to say that there aren't many more, but the community really appreciated this one a whole lot, and it's class diversity. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, for once, this was an expansion where every class and spec basically had a viable meaning to be in a raid. This in the sense meant that whatever you wanted to be, a tank, a healer, a DPS, whatever your class was, you were allowed to pretty much do those things. And you could still find your way into a group. It wasn't like before where a boomkin was excluded because boomkin was useless, back in a while ago. Now, it is also introduced dual spec, so if you wanted to tank for a fight or two, you didn't have to completely go respec. You paid 1k gold, and you could permanently unlock 2 specs, and you were allowed to swap between them freely. It was just, overall, it was really good for class ability. So you could come back in and off tank for one fight, main spec DPS, but you're just using the utility overall of every class, and it was really, really good. And like I said, class diversity was a thing, so there wasn't huge stackings really of just one class specifically. You could pretty much make a group out of any setup and still manage to down bosses. So it wasn't like you were stuck using one class, I didn't see that much stacking of really anything. Maybe arcane mages, but that was about it. So it was really nice to see like that kind of thing. And balancing was somewhat decent throughout the course of the expansion. Some classes did, of course, shine, but that always happens. And PvP balancing was kind of shaky. Overall, though, it was a great expansion for just about any class. Now to get into the bad things, which surprisingly, it wasn't that hard to find people complaining about Wrath of the Lich King. I thought it would, everybody praises it, like I said, so the idea of seeing about so many people complaining was pretty surprising. But anyways, let's just get into what people disliked. Raids. Wrath of the Lich King had a decent amount of raids, but people didn't seem to appreciate most of them. There was a pretty common theme throughout Wrath that obviously was quite boring, but Blizzard kept putting them in, so let's look at this theme. Eye of Eternity. Go inside, kill boss, raid done. Sartharian's Lair. Go inside, kill boss, raid done. Vault of Archimon. Go inside, kill boss, raid done. Trial Crusade. Go in raid, kill boss, done. Like, there was no... It was a common theme, and there was no big surprise. It was all boring. So, now, people don't like that. If you're thinking raid, you're thinking go into a big, huge dungeon. It's got art and everything throughout. You're supposed to be amazed when you walk in. You're venturing through a raid, you're not supposed to just go into a hall where you're handed loot. And that was a theme that happened throughout Wrath. And it's no surprise that the community didn't appreciate it much. And not only that, the Naxxramas and Trial of Crusade raids were very, very not well taken. So let's just get into it. So Nax, the level 80 version, was the first tier of the expansion. And this is basically what the developers did. They took out one of the most coveted raids for being extremely difficult, turned it into a baby rattle, and let us shake the snot out of it. The raid was quite a joke in terms of difficulty, and I'm going to interject in my own experience on this matter. This X-Pack was the first I ever experienced healing. I leveled my good old shaman to 80, and then gave it a go. Fresh healer just dinged 80, and after like 2 days, I see a group for Nax 25 looking for one healer. Offer my services. State, I don't really know what I'm doing yet. Invited. And then after 4 hours, our group had knocked out 25-man Nax with no real difficulty. Keep in mind, I was clueless healing at the time. I didn't even know what rotation I should use, nothing. So, one of the key roles in the group, and I'm not saying the healers are, more important, but if one DPS is doing poorly, it's not as noticeable as one healer doing poorly, if that makes sense. So, a key role in the group didn't know what he was doing, and we still managed to clear it with very little difficulty. It was a pug group, mind you, so complete strangers. And overall, my point is, the raid was surprisingly easy. And this was only 2 weeks after the raid. Maybe 2-3 weeks. Can't remember. But it was very short after the release of the raid. Yeah. Too easy. As for Try the Crusade, well, I don't really need to say much. This raid was loathed by the community, it seemed. The raid itself didn't make any sense. Why Ice Crown? Why is the raid there? Why are Horde and Alliance killing each other for the Lich King's amusement? It was basically filler content that wasn't explained well. What are you even doing? And people also hated the jousting of the games and the dungeons. Not to mention, it was released very shortly after Ulduar, making almost all of the gear from Ulduar completely irrelevant. And, that was sad, because Ulduar was an extremely beautiful raid. Well designed. I would say it's probably the majority of people's favorite raid from Wrath of the Lich King. It's mine, but, I mean, from reading so many comments, nobody says ICC. I only see Ulduar was my favorite raid. So, I don't know. I'm going to say that probably a lot of people liked Ulduar, and it had an awesome story all its own. Overall rating in Wrath, though, had good points, but based on a lot of the community posts, it was majorly a downside of Wrath. Rating was a bad scene. Now, as I said, I'll get back into casual. So I was talking about how casual was a good thing, but it was also a bad thing. So, the fact is, many people joined the game during Wrath. There's even a term coined Wrath Baby, because the influx of players was so high, and it means an account or person that only started playing during Wrath of the Lich King. So, with all these new players in the game, Blizzard felt they needed to tone back mechanics so that casuals could still get the experience of most content. And this meant that mechanics of the game that were once necessary were basically tossed out the window. A prime example that could be seen was Wrath of the Lich King heroics. When comparing a heroic from Burning Crusade to a heroic from Wrath of the Lich King, the difficulty difference is absurd, okay? The crowd control was almost unnecessary from the beginning of Wrath. I remember very few times when anything was sheeped, sapped, nothing. I hardly remember it in Wrath of the Lich King. You just went in, you face rolled the dungeon, and you were out. That was it. This just meant that the content became extremely stale very fast. There wasn't any challenge to it, so you were in and out of a dungeon in like 10 minutes, it felt. It was fast, but it had a negative impact on the future of the game as well, because the style of gameplay became so embedded in people's minds when they made Heroics and Cataclysm difficult again. It was, the community complained they were too hard, but it was just because this style of gameplay was in everybody's mind. And while I don't want to go into that too much, I thought that was funny. But because it was prominent during Wrath, yeah, it killed the idea of crowd controlling or anything. Everything was just face roll when it came to most casual content. It also killed the idea of epic items being epic. They were handed out like candy throughout most of the expansion, so the idea of somebody wearing purples being, I guess, cool. I don't want to say cool. It's not that it's cool, but the idea that they were really a good player because they're wearing epics was pretty much gone, because everybody was in epic everything. It's not that helping casuals in this sense was bad. It's not that these things were bad. It's the fact that it didn't help because the things that people are complaining about today were started because of things like this. So it's It's kind of like it was a cool thing, and then now you understand, all those things that people hate now are based on things that started like this. So, yeah, it didn't help, and it started too much casual in the sense. And lastly, the thing that a lot of people complained about, I could see a very consensual agreement, was the death of, I guess, server community. It's not to say that it doesn't still exist, but Wrath began the downward spiral of it with one little kind of introduction, and it was looking for dungeon. The actual mechanic itself, looking for dungeon, is really good. It has a well thought out purpose. It's pretty smart. It makes it so you can streamline getting into a dungeon. You can see all the content that would normally be very difficult to make a group or maybe take too long if you're a casual player, things like that. So the idea of looking for dungeon is good. However, looking for dungeon also meant that you could be almost completely a twat in your group and nothing really mattered. You just find a new group and move on. Getting to know the people in your group wasn't a thing anymore. You joined, you silently ran the dungeon, and then you queued for another one. That was it. That was the heroic grind. Because you weren't... I can't remember having many conversations. You say hello maybe at the beginning of the dungeon, and that was it. So you didn't have to speak to anybody or anything. It also removed the sense of the world. I can assure you, if there weren't things like Mythic Plus in-game, I doubt many people would even know where the entrances to dungeons are anymore, because they queue for it. They don't know where it is. If you ask a new player now, where's the dungeon to Blackrock Depths, for instance, they probably don't even know. But they might have ran the dungeon. That's the point. The world is pretty much gone because of looking for dungeons. So people sit in Dalaran, they would queue for their heroic, and then sit in Dalaran some more. While looking for dungeon isn't entirely to blame, it opened a door to many changes that people continue to complain about today. So, yeah. Anyways, that's it for the video. There's plenty of other topics I could go on about, but like I said, I try to get a consensus and go off of that from all the things that I read. That being said, if I tossed in my own opinion, while I loved Wrath of the Lich King, I think Cataclysm gets beat down for many of the things that Wrath introduced. So, I'll go into it, of course, in the next installment of this video. But as always, I hope you enjoyed watching. So, thank you, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.